They emerge from the landscape like echoes of another time. Majestic fortresses that hold the secrets of kings and queens, of ambition, betrayal, beauty, and power. Across the hills of Scotland, the sunlit courts of Spain, and an island in Sweden. These are not just buildings, they are legends carved in stone. For centuries, they have watched empires rise and fall. They've echoed with the footsteps of revolutionaries, the whispers of intrigue, and the thunder of war. Some were built as fortresses, others as fantasies. But all of them were built to impress, to intimidate, and to last. Join us on a journey through 8 of the world's most breathtaking castles and palaces. From fairy tale towers to battle-scarred ruins, from gilded halls to secret passageways. Discover the untold secrets of their creators, the obsessions that built them, and the myths they've inspired. High above the city of Edinburgh, perched on an ancient volcanic rock, stands a fortress that has dominated the skyline for over 900 years. A guardian, a symbol, a witness to centuries of bloodshed, ceremony, and legend. This is Edinburgh Castle. Its story begins not with kings or queens, but with fire and stone. Set upon its mighty volcanic rock, Edinburgh Castle's strategic advantage is unmistakable. Towering above the Scottish capital, it has drawn warriors and kings for nearly 2 millennia. Long before it became a royal residence, Iron Age tribes recognized its military value, building a hill fort atop the cliffs. Early medieval poetry even tells of a war band who feasted here for a year, before riding to their deaths in battle. The castle has stood through fire and fury, guarding Scotland's most dramatic moments, and bearing the scars of countless sieges. During the Wars of Independence, it became a prized possession, changing hands repeatedly between Scots and English. In 1314, in one of the most daring raids in Scottish history, Thomas Randolph, nephew of Robert the Bruce, the King of Scots, who laid the foundation for an independent kingdom through his military triumphs, led his men up the steep rock face under cover of night and took the castle back. And after the brutal Lang Siege of 1573, the castle rose again with stronger fortifications, including the iconic Half Moon Battery, a curved rampart built on the ruins of David's Tower. It was later armed with the legendary Seven Sisters, 7 bronze cannons cast around 1500 for King James IV, which remained in place for over 200 years. But even these weapons tell only part of the story, for this is not just a fortress of war, it is a sanctuary of kings, a birthplace of royalty, and a symbol of a nation's soul. King David I, son of St. Margaret of Scotland, built the Chapel of St. Margaret, which still stands today, the castle's oldest surviving structure. Through the Middle Ages, Edinburgh Castle became the beating heart of Scottish monarchy. It was both a royal palace and a military fortress, a rare combination that gave it beauty and deadly purpose. In 1511, the castle saw the completion of the Great Hall, built for King James IV. Its timber roof soared above grand banquets and solemn state gatherings. But the king would never rule from it. Just 2 years later, he fell at the Battle of Flodden, the last British monarch to die in battle, fighting his own brother-in-law, Henry VIII of England. The gilded letters stand over the palace door, the initials of Mary, Queen of Scots, and her husband, Henry Stuart. It was here in 1566 that Mary gave birth to her son, the boy who would become James VI of Scotland and James I of England, uniting two crowns under one future. But the royal presence would not last. As monarchs moved south to London, the castle evolved into a military fortress, a garrison, and at times, even a prison. In 1650, Oliver Cromwell invaded and occupied the castle, converting it into military accommodation and defacing royal decorative schemes. Its dungeons once held pirates, political enemies, and prisoners of war from across Europe. Architecturally, the castle is a puzzle of time. Medieval gates, Renaissance halls, and 19th century restorations, all layered atop the bones of a volcano. And at its heart, symbols of sovereignty, the Scottish crown jewels. Once hidden away after union with England, and rediscovered centuries later by Sir Walter Scott, a Scottish novelist and poet whose tales shaped the world's image of Scotland and its romantic past. In 2023, the honors returned to the spotlight, presented to King Charles III in Edinburgh, not for coronation, but as a tribute to Scotland's enduring identity and place in the United Kingdom. Today, Edinburgh Castle is no longer a fortress of war, but a symbol of Scottish identity. Over 2 million visitors a year climb the cobbled path to its gates. They come not only to see the views or the cannons or the jewels. They come to feel something deeper, a connection to the soul of Scotland. Before Versailles became the symbol of French grandeur. Before the Hall of Mirrors dazzled diplomats and queens. There was only forest and the sound of hoofbeats. In August of 1607, Versailles welcomed its first royal footsteps when the Dauphin, the future Louis XIII, came for a hunting trip. Surrounded by wild meadows and dense woodlands alive with pheasants, boars, and stags, he discovered more than an ideal hunting ground. He found a quiet refuge. At just 3 years old, Louis XIV was brought to Versailles, escaping a smallpox outbreak that swept through the royal court. He likely remembered none of it, but fate had already drawn him to the place that would one day bear his mark. The boy who would become the Sun King had entered the orbit of a castle destined to become the center of his world. By 1661, Louis XIV claimed Versailles not just as a retreat, but as a canvas. He envisioned a palace that would rival the gods, a political statement in stone. Year after year, wing after wing rose. The royal chapel, the dazzling hall of mirrors and fountains, so elaborated they needed entire rivers rerouted. It had become a glittering symbol of absolute monarchy, where every gesture and ritual centered on the king's authority and grandeur. But even the brightest suns must set. After Louis XIV's death in 1715, the palace fell silent. It would be years before Versailles felt royal again. Louis XV returned, retreating from the grandeur his predecessor had so meticulously built. But it was his grandson, Louis XVI, who would be Versailles' final king in residence. Shy and intellectual, Louis XVI preferred locks and maps to court life, a quiet thinker behind closed doors. In the privacy of his chambers, he was a man of thought, not performance. Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, found little comfort in the rigid etiquette of the French court. The people called her extravagant and aloof. But behind the rumors was a young woman desperate to breathe. In 1774, Louis gave her the Petit Trianon, a neoclassical hideaway tucked deep within the palace grounds. There, she created a simple world of gardens and a make-believe village, escaping from the palace to play shepherdess, free from judgment. But while the queen played at simplicity, life outside the gates was growing more desperate. France was facing economic ruin. Hunger gripped the cities. The monarchy, cloistered behind gilded doors, seemed increasingly out of touch. Whispers of revolution became roars. In May 1789, the Estates General met at Versailles, and by October, the palace was no longer a symbol of glory. It was a symbol of oppression. On October 5th, thousands marched from Paris to Versailles, demanding bread. The next morning, they stormed the palace. The royal family, roused from their beds, shaken, surrounded, was forced to leave. Versailles had lost its sovereigns. They would never return. Though the mobs did not destroy it, the palace was left in silence. The mirrors reflected empty halls. The fountains ran for no one. The palace had become a ghost of monarchy, haunted not by spirits, but by memory. The 20th century opened under the shadow of war. When the First World War erupted, Versailles, like the rest of France, fell quiet. The palace closed its doors, its masterpieces carefully shielded from harm. But unlike the devastation suffered by other regions, Versailles was never invaded. The gardens remained intact. The marble statues still stood. And though the crowds thinned, the spirit of the place endured. Then, in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, marking the end of the Great War. For a brief moment, all eyes turned again to this storied palace, a place where history seemed destined to repeat itself. Today, Versailles is more than a monument. It's a living museum, a symphony of stone and story. Visitors come from around the world to walk its halls. Ever faithful to its origins, Versailles remains a sanctuary for art, beauty, and history. Each year, a new voice from the world of contemporary art is invited to leave their mark, bridging past and present in a place where time refuses to stand still. High in the Bavarian Alps stands a castle that feels more imagined than built. Neuschwanstein. Majestic, haunting, unreal. A fantasy made stone, born not from war or politics, but from the restless dreams of a king desperate to escape the world he ruled. In summer of 1868, construction began. By September of the following year, King Ludwig II laid the foundation stone, sealed with portraits, coins, and dreams, just as his father Ludwig I had once done. Though it would come to look like a medieval fantasy, Neuschwanstein was built with the most modern techniques of the 19th century: brick walls, cemented foundations, and limestone only for show. The first structure to rise was the Gateway Building, completed by 1873 and used by the king as temporary lodging. The towers and walls rose toward the sky, but Ludwig died in 1886 before it was completed. His fairy tale vision wasn't fully realized until 1892. A castle born from fantasy, realized only after its dreamer was gone. The castle's interiors are a tapestry of medieval legends and Wagnerian operas. Murals depict tales of love, redemption, and heroism, featuring characters like Tannhäuser, Lohengrin, and Parzival. The swan appears throughout the castle, symbolizing purity and Ludwig's Schwangau heritage. The throne room resembles a church more than a hall of power, with its golden mosaics, vaulted ceilings, and no throne at all. The Singers' Hall, inspired by Wartburg Castle, was built not for royal banquets, but for imagined performances of Wagnerian operas that never came. Even the king's private bedroom is a masterpiece, hand-carved woodwork, celestial ceilings, and stained glass narrating German legends. Neuschwanstein wasn't just a castle, it was a stage. A stage built for one man. While the exterior of the castle evoked medieval grandeur, its construction was a marvel of modern engineering. It boasted innovations such as hot air, central heating, running water on every floor, and even a telephone system, a rarity at the time. Meals were transported via a lift system, and an electric bell system summoned servants, blending 19th century technology with the king's romantic vision. During World War II, the Nazis turned this mountain retreat into something far removed from Ludwig II's medieval idyll. The castle became a secret vault for plundered treasure, a storage site for one of the greatest art heists in history. It was also used by the Nazi task force that systematically looted artwork and cultural property from occupied Europe, especially from Jewish families, libraries, and museums. By war's end, over 20,000 stolen items had been catalogued within the castle's ornate halls, hidden behind stone walls. As the Third Reich crumbled, Neuschwanstein was flagged as a priority target by the Monument's Men, a group of Allied officers dedicated to protecting and recovering cultural heritage. Thanks to their efforts, priceless masterpieces and rare books were spared destruction, and many would find their way back home. In the 1950s, Walt Disney and his wife Lillian visited Neuschwanstein, a trip through Europe. Surrounded by soaring towers, winding staircases, and panoramic mountain views, Walt saw more than just a romantic ruin. Inspired by the castle's dreamy silhouette and fantastical details, Walt Disney brought its spirit back with him to California. Neuschwanstein became the architectural muse for what would become Sleeping Beauty Castle. First in the 1950 animated film and later as the glittering centerpiece of Disney theme parks around the world. Though not identical, Neuschwanstein's towers and setting clearly inspired Disney's fairy tale vision. Neuschwanstein is more than a royal residence. It reflects a king's withdrawal into a world of legend, art, and imagined grandeur, built as much for solitude as for spectacle. Today, Neuschwanstein welcomes over 1.4 million visitors each year, making it one of the most visited castles in Europe. Tourists travel to this alpine perch for its views, towers, and a taste of history blended with fantasy. Hidden within its painted halls and vaulted chambers are the echoes of Wagnerian legends, medieval ideals, and the haunting solitude of a monarch who dreamed too grandly for his time. High above the winding Neckar River, cradled by the emerald forests of Königstuhl Hill, rise the majestic red sandstone ruins of Heidelberg Castle, one of Germany's most storied and iconic landmarks. Its silhouette dominates the city's skyline, standing guard over Heidelberg's old town, as it has for nearly 800 years. But the story behind these walls is more than just a tale of beauty. It is one of ambition, destruction, rebirth, and timeless romance. The story of Heidelberg Castle traces back to 1225, when the Counts Palatine of the Rhine first made it their residence. Over the next centuries, Heidelberg Castle transformed into one of the most magnificent examples of Renaissance architecture in the Holy Roman Empire. The Ottheinrich wing, built between 1556 and 1559, is perhaps the crown jewel. An early German Renaissance marvel, its facade adorned with statues of ancient heroes and emperors, immortalizing power, virtue, and legacy in carved stone. But glory has a price. In the late 17th century, the castle fell victim to the French during the War of the Grand Alliance. Once again in 1764, disaster struck, not by hand, but by the heavens. 2 lightning bolts ignited fires that consumed what war had left behind. Heidelberg Castle was reduced to a skeleton of its former self. By the 19th century, these ruins became an icon of the Romantic movement. Poets, painters, and travelers saw not ruin, but poetry in the ivy-clad, crumbling towers. The castle was no longer just a fortress. It was a muse. This reverence gave rise to preservation efforts, saving the castle from further decay and ensuring its place in the heart of the German identity. Inside the barrel building, we'll find one of the castle's most famous features, the giant Heidelberg Tun, a massive wine barrel once used to store an incredible amount of wine. It reminds us of the lively feasts that once took place here. Just next door, the King's Hall was where grand celebrations were held. One of the most iconic places in the castle were the castle's once legendary gardens. Conceived by Prince Elector Friedrich V in the early 17th century, this garden was meant to rival Versailles. Though never finished due to war and unrest, its terraces, grottos, and gates still hint at a once mythical splendor. Today, Heidelberg Castle welcomes over 1 million visitors each year. Special exhibitions, historical tours, concerts, and, in tribute to its fiery past, breathtaking firework displays remind us of the castle's dual legacy, its rise and its ruin. Much has been preserved, more has been protected. The original facade sculptures from the Ott Heinrichs wing now reside indoors, admired up close during exclusive tours. Meanwhile, new life emerges in old walls, with glass roofs, restored halls, and event spaces blending past with present. Imagine a place where water dances, gold glimmers in the sun, and every corridor whispers tales of emperors, espionage, and elegance. An imperial fantasy etched into the shoreline. Often called the Russian Versailles, Peterhof is far more than a royal residence. It's an entire world of fountains, art, gardens, and grandeur. A palace complex built to impress not only foreign dignitaries, but eternity itself. Our story begins in 1714 with Tsar Peter the Great. Inspired by his travels in Western Europe, particularly the splendor of Versailles, Peter wanted to craft a summer retreat that would rival the greatest palaces of the world. But Peterhof was more than a vanity project. For a man obsessed with naval power and modernization, it was also a bold statement. Russia had arrived on the world stage. At the heart of Peterhof lies the Grand Palace, the crown jewel of the estate. Though today it stretches a majestic 300 meters across the landscape, the original palace was a modest two-story manor, Peter's so-called upper chambers. But as the Russian court grew more decadent, so too did its architectural taste. Under the reign of his daughter, Empress Elizabeth, the palace underwent a dazzling transformation. Enter Bartolomeo Rastrelli, the master of Russian Baroque. Tasked with expanding Peter's humble structure, Rastrelli didn't demolish it. Instead, he did something extraordinary. He built around it, weaving the original walls into a new architectural marvel. He added soaring wings, side pavilions, and a third floor. Inside, mirrors expanded the space, gilded carvings glowed, and even Peter's oak study remained a sacred relic amid the Baroque splendor. Under Catherine the Great, halls were redone in the classical style. Stucco replaced gilding, favoring elegance over excess, yet the palace kept its soul, vision, power, and evolving taste. And Peterhof wasn't just for show. It was alive with court life, balls, weddings, baptisms, and masquerades for thousands. But even beauty like this isn't safe from war. During World War II, the palace was seized, looted, and blown up by Nazi forces. What was left was rubble. Yet against all odds, Soviet restorers resurrected it, piece by painstaking piece. By 1964, the first halls reopened. Today, visitors walk through spaces that rose from ashes. And the marvels don't end with the palace. Just outside its southern doors lies the upper garden, a manicured, geometric marvel of parterres, fountains, and mythological statues. Once a vegetable garden for the imperial kitchens, it gradually became a living gallery. At its heart stands the Neptune Fountain, a grand bronze god of the sea, trident in hand, surrounded by trumpeting tritons and writhing sea creatures. But the true spectacle lies beyond, where the land plunges down to the Gulf of Finland. This is the Lower Park, a 100-hectare symphony of nature, art, and hydraulic engineering genius. Over 150 fountains sparkle here. Water flows entirely through gravity-fed systems designed in the 18th century. And the most iconic feature? The Grand Cascade. Directly beneath the palace, a tumbling series of steps, statues, and jets, culminating in a gilded statue of Samson wrestling a lion, a symbol of Russia's triumph over Sweden in the Great Northern War. The fountain alone shoots water 20 meters into the air. It's a performance every day for everyone. And then, tucked away near the shoreline, you'll find Peter the Great's true love, the Montplaisir Palace. Unlike the grandeur above, this was Peter's private sanctuary, a modest Dutch-style house with tiled walls, a Chinese lacquer room, and even a kitchen where his wife Catherine once cooked. From his study, he could watch the sea, imagining ships bound for the west, bearing the new modern Russia he was building. It's here that Peter's spirit feels closest, not in the gold, but in the vision. So why does Peterhof still captivate? Because it was born from Peter the Great's ambition. Transformed under Catherine the Great, nearly destroyed in World War II, and carefully rebuilt as a symbol of cultural resilience. At the heart of Madrid, where the city rises with Baroque splendor, stands a palace that's not just a royal residence. It's a monument to empire, fire, ambition, and survival. This is the Royal Palace of Madrid, the largest functioning royal palace in Europe. The Royal Alcazar of Madrid stood on the very grounds where today's Royal Palace now rises. Originally built in the late 9th century by Muslim rulers, the fortress was gradually expanded over the centuries, especially after 1560, when it began its transformation into a royal palace. It then became the heart of Spain's imperial court, and Madrid was named the capital. King Charles I commissioned the first major expansion, completed in 1537. Later, in 1636, architect Juan Gómez de Mora redesigned its exterior under King Philip IV, blending the fortress and palace in an unusual architectural mix. The Alcazar was as renowned for its vast artistic treasures as its historic walls, serving as the residence of the Spanish royal family, until its destruction by fire during the reign of King Philip V, the first Bourbon monarch. On Christmas Eve, 1734, a devastating fire engulfed the Alcazar, raging for 4 days. Miraculously, the flames spared the Royal Library and the Treasury House, but the Grand Hall's housing masterpieces were not so fortunate. Works by Titian, Rubens, Velázquez, Caravaggio, among others, were threatened with destruction. Desperate courtiers risked their lives, cutting canvases from frames and tossing them out windows to safety. Thanks to their courage, Velázquez, Las Meninas, and the equestrian portrait of Charles V survived, though the latter was darkened by smoke. These rescued works remain among the crown jewels of the Prada Museum today. But many priceless pieces perished in the flames. The first royal resident was King Charles III of Spain, the so-called Mayor King of Madrid. In 1764, he moved in, bringing with him Enlightenment ideals and exquisite taste. He transformed the palace into a jewel of Rococo and neoclassical design. The throne room is one of its most dazzling and symbolically important spaces. Its walls are lined with red velvet embroidered in gold, and it is crowned by a magnificent ceiling painted by Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, depicting the Spanish monarchy as a divine institution. Gilded lions flank the twin thrones beneath a rich red velvet canopy, evoking centuries of royal power. But the room is not just ceremonial opulence, it remains in active use by the Spanish royal family for official state functions. Historically, it has hosted ambassadors presenting their credentials, royal audiences, and key moments during state visits where heads of state are formally received. It's also a platform for important speeches or constitutional declarations by the monarch. While Spain is now a constitutional monarchy, the throne room still symbolizes the continuity of royal tradition. The thrones currently on display were used by King Juan Carlos I and Queen Sofia. And then, the Royal Armoury, arguably Spain's most overlooked treasure. Here lies the armor of Charles V, crafted by Milanese and Nuremberg masters. Not just war gear, this is ceremonial sculpture in steel. His horse's armor even has its own intricate plumage and family crest. Though no monarch has lived here permanently since Alfonso XIII, the palace remains the royal ceremonial seat. The royal family of Spain don't regularly greet from the Royal Palace balcony in Madrid. Although it's the official residence, the royal family lives at Zarzuela Palace outside the city. The balcony is mainly used for special occasions like the proclamation of a new king. Beyond the gates lie the Campo del Modo Gardens, once used for royal hunts, now home to peacocks and swans. It stretches behind the palace over 20 hectares of peaceful greenery. The final redesign came in 1890 during Queen Maria Christina's regency. Open daily, the gardens offer concerts, refreshments, and quiet respite. The magnificent view of the palace from the gardens aligns perfectly with its architectural grandeur. The Royal Palace of Madrid is mostly used for state ceremonies nowadays. It's also a museum and a cultural treasure. Just a short boat ride from Stockholm, on the serene island of Löven, stands a jewel of Sweden's royal heritage, Drottningholm Palace. It has served as a place of royal retreat, cultural blossoming, and now, everyday life for the Swedish royal family. The story of Drottningholm begins in the late 1500s, when King John III built the original palace as a gift for his queen, Catherine Jagiellon. But disaster struck in 1661 when a devastating fire reduced it to rubble. What rose from those ashes would become one of the most treasured Baroque residences in Europe. Queen Hedwig Eleonora, one of the great matriarchs of Swedish royalty, made Drottningholm her own. Her state bedroom, crafted by the finest artists and craftsmen in the land, was a marvel of its time. But it was the monumental staircase, with its optical illusions and sculpted drama, that became the palace's architectural centerpiece. A century later, Queen Louisa Ulrika of Prussia, sister to Frederick the Great, breathed new life into Drottningholm. A patron of science, the arts, and Enlightenment thinking, she surrounded herself with writers, philosophers, and musicians. With the help of architect Jean-Eric Rain, she created the Rococo Library, still considered one of the most beautiful rooms in Sweden. Her son Gustav III inherited the throne and a love for the palace, where he raced through halls, quizzed Linnaeus on pelicans, and admired Roman coins. As king, Gustav III added his own flourish, elegant interiors like the Chinese salon, and fine furnishings crafted by Sweden's greatest artisans. Drottningholm became a mix of formality and freedom, a palace of celebrations, salons, and royal retreats. Yet, it was also the stage for dramatic endings. In 1809, after an overthrow of power, King Gustav IV Adolf was brought here in disgrace. Before his exile, marking the end of the Gustavian era. But Drottningholm was never forgotten. The Bernadotte dynasty, which still reigns today, breathed new life into the palace. King Oscar I and Queen Josephina introduced the Hall of the Realm, while future monarchs like Gustav V and Gustav VI Adolf left their marks as well. Since 1981, King Carl XVI Gustaf and Queen Sylvia have made Drottningholm their private residence. While much of the palace is open to visitors, there's a wing where the royals actually live, a quieter corner of royal life away from the formalities of the Royal Palace in central Stockholm. The palace is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, celebrated for its stunning Baroque gardens and one of Europe's oldest working theaters. A palace of queens and kings, artists and philosophers, rituals and revolutions. Drottningholm is Sweden's story. Set in the heart of the Netherlands, Apeldoorn is a quiet town framed by forests and royal history. On its edge stands Paleis Het Loo, a serene royal retreat steeped in Baroque charm. The story of this palace begins with Stadtholder William III of Orange, later King William III, the first member of the House of Orange-Nassau to live here. In 1684, he purchased the nearby medieval castle Het Loo, nestled in the Veluwe forest, with a grand vision in mind. His plan was to build a hunting lodge adjacent to it, but what began as a modest retreat would soon evolve into a full-fledged palace. Just 5 years after its construction, history shifted dramatically. In 1689, William III of Orange and Mary II were crowned King and Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland during the Glorious Revolution. As rulers of two kingdoms, they had to divide their reign. Willem traveled back and forth, but Queen Mary remained in England, never to return to her beloved Dutch palace. She died in 1694 at just 32 years old, never again setting eyes on her beloved Dutch palace. In 1795, tragedy struck again. The French invaded the Netherlands, and Stadtholder Willem V and his family fled in haste. Paleis Het Loo was left behind and plundered by French troops. For a time, it was no longer a royal home, but a prize of conquest. Then, in 1806, it found a new occupant, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon Bonaparte and king of the newly created Kingdom of Holland. Though his reign was brief, his time at Het Loo added another layer to its international story. After the Napoleonic era, the palace returned to its roots. Generations of Dutch royals would call it home. It became the official summer palace of the Dutch monarchy, a place not just of leisure, but of governance, diplomacy, and identity. Even in modern times, the connection endures. From 1967 to 1977, Princess Margrethe, the aunt of the current king, lived here with her family. And though no royals live here now, they remain deeply connected to the place. At the grand reopening of the renovated palace in 2023, King Willem Alexander said simply, "It feels like coming home." Since 1984, the palace has been a museum. Everything here, from the original furnishings to the intricate tapestries, is authentic and intact. The palace is a living archive of Dutch royal history, with rooms preserved exactly as they were. Each space tells a story, from statecraft to childhood, from exiles to banquets. The restored Baroque gardens are also a highlight, exact recreations of their 17th century design, with symmetrical paths, decorative fountains, and rare plant species. With the help of Dutch and French landscape architects, William and Mary designed these magnificent gardens inspired by Versailles. The palace serves as a national symbol of the House of Orange-Nassau, hosting royal events, exhibitions, and even historical carriages and state vehicles once used by monarchs. In fact, the Dutch royal family still uses the palace for official ceremonies and occasional family gatherings, while its legacy lives on. From Scottish ramparts and Swedish pavilions to sun-drenched Spanish courts, and the fountains of Peterhof, these royal palaces are more than monuments. They are theaters of history, where power was shaped, where beauty was declared, where legacy took root. Each corridor echoes with footsteps of kings and queens, poets and soldiers, visionaries and dreamers. Their walls have seen triumph and exile, celebration and war. And through it all, they endure. Today, these castles no longer hold sovereign power. But they hold something perhaps even more endearing: memory. These are the castles of time. And their stories will outlast us all.